When building applications that have a longer lifetime, it's important to use interfaces so that you can adapt to changes in the business process as time goes forward. But sometimes you need to extend an interface, and you don't want to go back and fix all the dozens of things that implement that interface. You may not even own them. How can we get around that? Let's smash on that. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to continue taking a look at some of the new C# 8 features. Specifically today, we're going to look at default implementations inside of interfaces. So I have built here a very handy application which is going to list blenders. And if we run this, we can see that all it does is just prints out a table of a couple of different kinds of blenders. So the KitchenAid and the Oyster blenders, what their capacity is, number of speeds, and what colors they are. So this is great. And the way this is done is we just have a list of blenders, and then each one of these blenders returns the information about itself. So we know what the name is and number of speeds and what color it is and its capacity. So that's great, but we want to add a new blender to our collection here. So we have now this new BlendTech blender here. Now the BlendTech blender also implements that same blender interface, but it actually has an additional property as well, which is whether or not it can blend a brick, which in this case is true. So we want to add that to our display table here. So we'll add can blend a brick here, and then down here we just do blender.can blend a brick. All right, so it looks like there's a problem here in that even though our BlendTech blender implements can blend a brick, we can't actually call it here because KitchenAid and Oyster don't implement the interface. So what we can do is we can go back here to our iBlender and we can add that interface implementation. All right, you can be able to add it here using CodeRush. So I'm going to add, actually I'm not going to do that because I'm worried it's going to get too smart for me. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to go to the iBlender here, and we'll just add this can blend a brick here, which looks like this. Extra thing there. All right, great. So now everything should work just fine, right? Oh, except things don't compile for us. So the reason they don't compile is because this KitchenAid blender doesn't implement that interface. Neither does the Oyster one. So we would have to go back to both of these blenders, and right now it's not a big deal because there's only 2 of them, and add that additional property. But if there were a dozen blenders or 24 different blenders, or we didn't actually own the source code to this, we were pulling in iBlenders from a library, then we wouldn't have any real way of implementing this. We would have to like wrap every blender in some sort of another tool or another class that added that to them and extend all of them, which would be a huge amount of work to do. So what we can do now in C# 8 is we can actually provide what's called a default implementation. So the idea here is that if your blender happens to have this method on it, then this will be what gets called. But if it's missing it, then it's going to call the default implementation here inside of the default interface. So we can add that here, and it's just going to look very simply like this. Return false. There's all these other blenders, they don't have the ability to blend a brick. We can see that the warnings have gone away here now. And if we just hit F5 now, everything compiles nicely. And BlendTech blender has true, while the other 2 blenders have false. That's the value right there.
Now, compared to like traditional C# as we've known it all these years, that's crazy. We have implementation inside of an interface there.
Yeah, normally that's something that we wouldn't do, but in this case, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there are some limitations around like what you can do inside of these implementations. You can reference existing properties inside the class. So we could do things like color equals blue, or something like that. So this is okay, because this references something that it knows exists in every class. Oh, maybe it isn't okay. Oh, it's read-only. That's the problem. There we go. So that should be fine now.
Yeah.
So that is something you can do. So it means that you can add like new properties to it in a different way. So what we could do is we could do something like, let's say that we're internationalizing our application here, and the capacity, which has of course been in milliliters all this time, we now need to be able to get it in whatever crazy units some countries use. So let's add another one here, and we'll call this capacity in hogsheads. I don't know what the conversion factor is for a hogshead to a milliliter. Let's see. Hogshead in milliliters. A hogshead. Oh, this is useful. So a hogshead looks like it's equivalent to about 4 turns, or 2 pipes. Let's try that again. Okay, so a hogshead is equal to this many liters. So let's see what we can do with that. So that means we would want to take what the capacity turn capacity divided by that times 1,000, I think. So 1 liter is equal to, oh no, sorry, a hogshead is very big. So it's actually like this. Okay, there we go. 1 liter is equal to 0.004 hogshead. So I think a hogshead's like a barrel. Anyway, this
Bigger
is how
hogs than I was expecting.
Yeah, for sure. I would have thought a hogshead would be like 10 liters at most.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've added this here, so we can actually go back and do like capacity in. Obviously, there's no SI abbreviation for this, but so we do blender dot capacity in hogsheads. There we go. I feel like I have something the wrong way around here. These are way too big. It must have been divided.
Because of you're going from milliliters to hogsheads. Your conversion was from liters, so times.
Right, so actually just divide that by 1,000.
Divided by 1,000. Yeah.
But I bet people, when they started watching this episode, were not expecting this to be the same.
Right.
So,
probably not. But we should make sure we get this right.
Yeah. It's super important.
That looks better.
Yeah, because that's like half a liter's worth of hogsheads.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
All right.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, so that's just this new functionality back into our classes as if it was always there.
Yeah, and it kind of has the feeling of like the types of things that maybe you would have put in like an abstract base class, potentially, or like a base class, but without requiring that level of inheritance now.
Right, and so it does mean that we can do things like because we have interfaces, we can kind of use more than one on a class.
Right, yeah.
So if we wanted to, we could take this one out here. We could just make a new interface. I was hoping that would be the abbreviation for interface. Public interface, an I imperial. We could have this implementation on this one here,
right.
And then we could set just on the blenders that we were interested in having that on.
Yeah, that's cool.
You could like couple them together, so it's almost like multiple inheritance, but not quite, because multiple inheritance we could like add entirely new fields and things that were not necessarily like that didn't have any relationship to each other, but here we're kind of limited that we need to use things that are in here. So like this interface here, you can see now that it's failing because it doesn't actually know about capacity anymore.
Right, yeah. Huh, interesting. Very cool.
All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us on today's entirely SI unit driven episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. Remember to like, comment, and share this with a metric ton of your friends.
Bye.
Bye.